Abuse. It's something that's way too common. It often hides in the shadows, and its effects are long lasting. But one thing's for certain: abuse of any kind is never okay. Please know that there are people out there that are ready and willing to help you. And some tell their story so that you know that you're not alone and that there's hope. Today, we share one of those stories. Welcome to Beyond the Lens and my interview with Stephanie Hester. Well, hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about, and tell me about growing up. Where did you grow up? Who are you with?
Okay. So by the time I was in my 30s, I had moved almost 30 times. So I grew up in a lot of places. But when I think of childhood, a lot of it was in Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. And we lived with my grandfather when I was young. So I think between like first and third grade is when we lived with him. And it's a very interesting lifestyle because our house literally was connected to a bar by a door in our dining room. So one side of the door was the house and one side of the door was the bar. So it just, it was an interesting kind of growing up years, interesting influences.
So what was your relationship with your family like?
It was very strained. I felt so early on. I felt like an outcast, and I guess a lot of that comes from the fact that I was molested by my grandfather during those years. So that really set the stage for relationships in general, but especially with my family. I was a latchkey kid, and so my brother and I were, but a lot of times my brother, he was older, and so he wouldn't come home with me. And, the bus would drop us off. He'd come in the back of the bar, walk behind the bar, get the key to the house, unlock the door, and go in the house. And, it just, like I said, it was just a really unique, I guess, childhood. And so my immediate family, in hindsight, I can see I started to pull away just because things were very strained, and I didn't ever feel like I fit in. I didn't know how to have a relationship, I guess, was a big piece of it.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of what happened with your grandfather affected that. So how old were you when that abuse began, do you think?
I was around 6 or 7, I think, when the abuse started, and it absolutely impacted everything about me. I mean, it immediately taught me that I had no value. It taught me that that I wasn't good for anything other than pleasing other people and being used as a tool to please other people. And it really robbed me of my voice when I was young. I remember, so our family, we were a very old school East Coast family with questionable ties. And a lot of us a lot of the family lived within a block of each other. They owned a lot of property. And so we would have Sunday evening supper, and everybody would come together. Even the folks who didn't live in that block would drive in, and it was a big to-do. But kids were to be seen and not heard. We were not to have any interaction with the adults, and we were kind of shoved aside to do our thing. And I remember several times having to approach my mom because I needed something, whether it was I had to go to the bathroom or I was hungry or whatever, and feeling like I shouldn't be there, one, and two, I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. And she would get so frustrated with me and say, speak up, speak up, speak up. I can't hear you. But the abuse had just robbed me completely of my voice. And I had such shame and self-disgust. And I just felt so unworthy that I couldn't interact. And so, yeah, it set the stage for those relationships from that point forward.
Do you think that any of your family members knew, or did you tell any of your family members?
I didn't tell anybody, and I think that was a big part of losing your voice. The threat to kids often is, if you say anything, I'm going to hurt so and so, or if you say anything, these will be the consequences. And so the abuser tends to, obviously, they intimidate the child because they don't want the child saying what's happening. And so I didn't reach out to anybody. I didn't. I just didn't. I just went into silence. But I started hallucinating. I started having a lot of behavioral issues. I started getting really paranoid. And sorry, I have a very sweet dog who you will probably see at some point. But I didn't, I just didn't have a voice. I didn't know how to reach out. As far as people knowing, I don't know that anybody like outright knew. I don't think it was something, as far as family members, that they knew and said, we're not going to deal with. Everybody has their own baggage and their own things they're dealing with. And I just think it was a situation where it was ignorance is bliss.
You think your behavior changed at all, that they would have picked up on anything if they had been looking for it?
I think probably if they had been looking for it, they would have picked up on it. I mean, I would hope as a parent that there would be signs. But you don't know. I can't say that for sure. I don't blame my parents or my family for not knowing, because it wasn't their doing that made it happen. And I had a choice. I could have spoken up and I didn't. So, I don't think there's any blame per se for allowing it to happen, other than for my grandfather. I mean, it was his choices that obviously led to it.
And how long did this go on?
We lived with him for about 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was ongoing during that time period.
So what was the catalyst to move out?
I think it was a job. I think we were in Maryland at the time and moved out to California. And I think it was my dad getting a job in California, and that's what moved us. His brother, or two of his brothers and dad, had already moved to California. And so we just kind of followed suit. The best that I remember, as a kid, I wasn't in those conversations. We just go.
So was the abuse with your grandfather the only case that you remember?
No, I think there was another family member that there was some molestation involved. And then again, like, so that just, it set the stage for choices that I made that led to abusive relationships a good bit of my life. Mm. It was what to me was the norm, as bad as that is. And so I didn't always recognize that I was getting into an abusive situation until I was there, or until, I started to get healing years later, and I could look back and go, that's why I did this, or that's what led to this choice. So there's been a history of abuse. It just comes in different forms.
Mm. And, it's important to take note too, that you were a baby. You were first grade or so. So anyone that has suffered through any kind of abuse, it's not your fault. It's not your doing. It doesn't matter what age you are. And you had mentioned earlier that you could have spoken up, but really, could you?
Yeah, and I wrestle with that, because absolutely it was not my fault. I mean, I can 100% say that was, as much as at the time I felt like it was, because that's what an abuser does. They put it on the victim. I could have gone to a teacher. I could have tried to find somebody who, so there we go. Now we're settled. I could have gone to a teacher. I could have gone, I don't know. I mean, I think I probably knew at that time I couldn't go to anybody in the family. I mean, I think it was probably very clear, just the way our family operated, that there wasn't a safe place in the family to go to. But I could have reached out outside of that if I had had the confidence to do it. However, I don't blame myself for not doing that, because I was a child, and I didn't know what that meant. And I was listening to my grandfather, and I was listening to his threats, and I was, believing that he would follow through. And so the intimidation worked.
Right. So, and also too, this, it's also worth noting that this doesn't just affect relationships with people. This also manifested itself in your career as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I constantly felt like I needed to prove myself because I had such shame and such self-disgust. And I felt like that when everybody looked at me, that's what they saw. And so I really wanted to prove them wrong. And so I early started trying to achieve things. You know, as soon as I became conscious of, oh, if I get good grades in school, I get an accolade. If I, whatever. And so I was constantly setting out to meet these expectations that I had put for myself. But along with that came such fear because if I would succeed in something, there was this fear of, oh my gosh, they're going to find out I'm a fraud. They're going to see that this isn't real. And so it was this constant pull of I need to prove people wrong, but if I prove them wrong, they're going to find out I'm not real, and they're going to see the truth about me, and the shame's going to be even worse. And so it was just a constant battle. When I was young, I was 14, and of course I wasn't processing all of this at the time, but I tried to commit suicide. And I think a lot of it came down to this thing, because I was excelling in school and getting accolades, and yet I was terrified and I felt alone and I just had all this shame. And, at 14, I didn't know how to deal. And so I
Right.
tried to overdose. And, but that kind of pull followed me for years. And it made for never being satisfied and never being content. Um,
So, what are some of the things that you did achieve?
wow. Well, I was the first to graduate from college in my family, and I graduated with national honors. So I was pretty excited about that. I took several trips overseas. I would do things like I was terrified of heights, but I climbed to the top of the Sydney Harbor Bridge on one of their tours just to prove I could do it. In the same vein, I decided to go skydiving because I wanted to prove that I could do it. But by the time I was 28, I was a VP of an outplacement firm, and I had to me, success, 200 square foot office, and I had a staff, and I was, working with judges and all sorts of people that in my 28-year-old brain said, this is success. And yet again, I would do all these things and still be terrified the whole time. It just wasn't enough. It was never enough. And I had to keep going for the next thing so that I wouldn't be found out.
And for somebody too who had this push and pull of visibility, you also danced on a pretty big stage too, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. I danced in the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. Yeah, again, somebody told me I couldn't do it. Auditions were coming through town and they said I'd never be able to do it. So I said, okay. So yeah, I auditioned and was in the Super Bowl for 2 years. Pretty fun.
So, how did everything come to a head for you, or did it finally come to a head? And then how did you move forward from there?
Yeah, it did. I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD. There was some adult trauma too that led to it. And what I've learned since then is kids who are abused often as adults manifest PTSD because, we just shove all of that down so much that when we go through trauma as an adult, which we all do, all of that junk just bubbles up and there's no way to continue to contain it, which I think in a lot of ways, at least for me, was really, really good. PTSD is horrible. I don't by any stretch want to say that it's good, but that was the beginning of me realizing something is really wrong here. And it took me a couple of years into the PTSD process because I just shut down. I literally at one point was sitting in my closet on my hands because if I let go of my hands, I would start pulling out my hair. Mm. And I had been making my living as a speaker prior to that, and I couldn't be around people. So sitting in my closet, sitting on my hands, thinking that there's got to be something else. I can't live like this. And so eventually I started reaching out to different people. I had a friend who was a therapist and we talked for a little bit. And so she kind of got me connected with a fantastic therapist. And I will say it took me a couple times. I had to meet with a couple of different therapists to find one that would work with me in the way that I needed. And this guy is phenomenal. And he helped me really start to walk through, one, the trauma, you know, how it impacted me and how I could deal with it and who I really am. Um, because yeah, like I said, I just hit that wall of saying there's got to be something else. I cannot function like this anymore. And so that was the beginning of my healing journey.
So, what about now?
I am still on it. I think I will probably forever be on this journey. I am obviously doing so much better than I was years ago. And I am learning that I have value and I have worth. And um, I'm learning about who I am because I didn't ever really know. My life was robbed from me so early. And then I started that cycle of trying to please people and perform. And so now I'm starting to discover, who am I? What do I like? I mean, even down to what colors do I like in my home? What do I like to wear? How do I want to cut my hair? I mean, silly things, but things that I never really took time to develop for me. And so it's an incredible, fun journey of discovering things. Um, Going to the store, I'll see something on the rack and think, oh, that's cute. And I'll put it on and go, oh no, I absolutely hate that. And it's okay. It's okay that I hate it. Whereas before I think, oh, but it's cute. Somebody else said it was cute. I really ought to get it. It's just this mind shift. And so it's a pretty fantastic place to be. Like I said, I think I'll be on it hopefully forever as I learn to discover who I am and peel back the layers. But it's fun. It's a fun place.
So, if you could go back and talk to the young girl that began this whole journey, knowing what you know now, what would you say to her?
And I would, first of all, of course, I'd tell her it's not her fault, that none of it is her fault, that these people who have abused her had a incredible distortion of themselves and of affection and of relationship, and that has should have no definition on who she is. I would tell her that she's valuable and loved, oh my gosh, and that she does not have to let this impact the rest of her life, that she can get help, that she can be who she was created to be, and that this doesn't have to be the thing that defines her. Gosh, and I would just hug her and just love her.
That's great. So, one more question. What's next for you?
Next. Well, part of it's just staying on this journey. I'm in a place where I'm kind of rebooting my life, so to speak, and I am allowing myself to take time with whatever that means. I don't know how much time that is, but I know that I don't want to rush the process, that I want to really dive into this healing, really face the bad choices I made and the reasons I made them. And obviously I don't want to do them again. Oh no. So I want to take time and heal from all that. But in the process, I'm hesitating because I don't know if I want to actually say this out loud. I am working on a second book. So I want to see that come out in time. I'm not given a definition to that. But I had published a book several years ago, and so I'm working on a second one. But I really want to work with women. My heart has been with women for years. I want women to know that there is hope. As women, even if you haven't been through this kind of trauma, we take on so much from other people, and we just carry these burdens that really aren't ours. And I want them to know that they don't have to do that, and that there's hope, and that there's joy, and that you can find who you are, and you can find this place of peace and love. And so I want to see that unfold. I have some ideas on how that'll work. I want to get back to speaking again. Like I said, I did that for a living years ago and would love to get back to that. And I have a couple of passion projects that I'm really excited about, that I'm ready to see them all start to unfold and fall into place.
Well, I wish you the very best. And it is an honor to know you. and be your friend. And I wish you nothing but happiness going forward. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was such a joy. Thank you. Thank you.
My job as a photographer is to see things in a different way, to create reactions, to frame what is seen so we can better understand. Here we take a look beyond the lens of what we may think we see or know about people, events, and situations. To subscribe, please join my mailing list, visit my YouTube channel, or look for Beyond the Lens on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple. I'm honored by the people I work with. If you'd like to talk about shaping the way you are seen in photographs, please schedule a call. I'd love to hear from you.